Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Gagnon Atelier. I'm your old pal, Tim Gagnon, and this is the Modern Masters Podcast. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited. We are back, baby, and we have got a great show for you today. I am so excited. We are here in our soon-to-be solar-powered art studio, and I'm excited about that. And we are glad that you are here to join us. Today, I have got a very special guest. She calls herself an emerging artist, but let me tell you what, when we say that this is the Modern Masters Podcast, I mean it every time. This girl is so good. Wait till you see it. Her art is fabulous. I just geek out every time I see it. It's one of the things that I went to a show of hers at the Panama City Center for the Arts, our art museum here in Panama City. And she did a show there, and I just fell in love with every single painting. And I know that you will too. She is a fabulous, fabulous artist. And so I just want to bring her on right now and introduce you to my friend. Here she is. I think I know what I'm doing. There she is. Joyful Enriquez. Thank you for coming on. Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Yeah, no, you did a great job.
Rock and roll. French guy got some Spanish names right. It's not easy. I took 2 years of Spanish class, but it was only to get a date with Maria Aristegui, and it didn't work out for me. It didn't work out. So Maria, if you're watching, yeah. So anyway, there you go. But so tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, we've known each other for a while. But this is your first time coming on the show. And as I've said before, I'm a huge, huge fan of your artwork. And I keep telling my wife, we will have one of Joyful's paintings in the house. It's going to happen. So we're always drooling over your artwork. But so tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us where you're from, because you're not actually from Panama City. You're not from Florida. But you paint sea life pretty much exclusively. So talk to us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, so I actually.
Whoop, we lost her audio. Oh, there you go.
Can you hear me? Okay, awesome.
I can hear you now.
Yeah, so I actually grew up in Michigan. Originally, I'm from Grand Rapids. My husband likes to make fun that I have a little bit of my northern accent still. But I've kind of lived all over. I've lived in Missouri and lived in Nebraska, some more like the Midwest states. But even though I didn't grow up around the water, it was always something that I felt connected to. And part of that is because two things. When I was little, just randomly, I started having these dreams at night. And I could breathe underwater and talk to ocean animals. So I was like in these dreams. I was probably like 5 or 6 years old. I was dreaming of swimming with whales and all these sea creatures. It was really magical and kind of a recurring dream, something I had over and over again. And so I just always was fascinated by the ocean. I was always interested in it. Instead of like playing video games and all this stuff, I just wanted to watch nature documentaries. We would go to the library and I would come home with packs of books about sharks and whales and all kinds of stuff. And I would try to draw them. So I checked out this book, probably I was 7 or 8 years old, a book on drawing sharks.
Nice.
Brought it home. And so, the ones where they, draw the circle, draw the triangle,
Uh-huh.
And I thought they were masterpieces. I'm like, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever drawn. And then, my mom sends me a picture of this like little drawing, last year or whatever. And, it's just a stick figure basically.
But she kept it. She kept it.
But she kept it, But yeah, so I didn't grow up around the water at all. My grandfather, sometimes when we would visit them, he liked to fish. and he would take me out on the lake. We would go, all of his grandkids and stuff, and go fishing. And I remember we would be sitting in the boat and he'd be fishing, and he didn't really say too much. So we were just out there. It was quiet, enjoying the nature. And I remember looking over the side of the boat around the lily pads, and he would often fish there because the bass would hide kind of around structures and undercover and things like that. And I remember seeing the fish swimming underneath the lily pads and having the thought, oh, I wonder what it must be like to be that fish and look at underwater from their perspective. And I would just imagine what that was like as a little kid. And that's actually what inspired that. We were talking earlier about the bass painting, the perfect cover. That was kind of one of my favorite paintings because it was inspired by that memory.
Wow.
So both of those things, I think just being outdoors with my grandpa for part of my childhood growing up in the country, and then those dreams I had when I was little really, I think, always stayed with me and made me want to pursue something where I could be around the water. I don't know if you remember, this is connected but a little bit different. That movie that came out, I think in the late 60s, called Flipper.
Yeah, I watched Flipper and the sequel.
Yeah. So that was like my favorite movie, like Flipper and Free Willy when I was a kid. And I just remember having this thinking, like, what is this magical land called Florida, where this kid can just walk out on his dock and this,
Dolphins right there,
dolphin,
yeah.
swims up to him, and I was like, I gotta go there. So I don't know, it was always there when I was little, and there were a lot of things growing up for one reason or the other that I felt like art wasn't something I could pursue, or it wasn't the responsible career as a woman, and I
Can't make a living as an artist, right?
like I could take care of myself and all these things. So I ended up going to college for criminal justice, actually.
Whoa.
So totally different, thing. But it was during that time I kind of had one of those like life crises, where you're out there, you're living your crazy college life, and you kind of try everything. And I got myself into some trouble and stuff. And I kind of reached a point in my life where I kind of had run my life into the ground, as it were. And because of some of my choices, some of my addictions and things like that, I ended up almost passing away. Wow. So I was in the hospital with a coma for 3 days. And when I came out of that, it was kind of like a wake-up call for me. You've kind of gone in the wrong direction. You've gotten a second chance at life. So what are you going to kind of do with that? And just the situation surrounding me kind of surviving was pretty miraculous, and something that for the first time in my life, I started to think about God and the reality of who he is, and that he could be real, that he could be loving or good, which was something I never thought before. I had very negative views about faith or religion or people who were religious. But it was kind of something, it was so miraculous how I survived the situation of even being found in the middle of the night and all these things, that it just proved to me that he was real, and that I must be here for a purpose and have purpose to my life and meaning, and that I was wasting my life, basically. And so I started thinking about, okay, like, if God is good and he's real and he's loving and he's created me with a purpose and he's given me the second chance at life, what am I going to do with it? So I really spent some serious time in prayer, just kind of like seeking what he would have for me. And he reminded me of these dreams that I had when I was little. And it was funny looking back, even though I hadn't had lessons or anything like that, I started remembering little things that were almost like signposts, like, hello, like, this is the way, like, this
right.
is what this is what you're called to do. And it was really scary, kind of because I was starting life over basically. I dropped out of college because of this. I had lost everything. I lost my apartment, I lost my car. Like I was really, because of my choices, I was starting over. So I kind of was like, okay, well, I think this is part of what God's calling me to do, um, doing art and being close to the ocean and all this stuff. So I just started researching schools and researching areas that I might be able to move to. So I worked for probably 3 or 4 years, saving up and started looking at schools. And I found this little school in Pensacola, Florida, called Pensacola Christian College. And it's funny because I'd heard about this school from an old friend of mine, and remember thinking, I'll never go there. Like, how could she? How could she go there?
Like,
It's
oh,
so like out there and so strict, and so all this stuff. I was like, I'm never going to that college. But she went, and she's a graphic designer. She works in Nashville now.
mhm.
So very successful, awesome. Um, but so I remembered her and reached out to her. I was like, what is the name of that school? I know you went for art degree and you're doing really well and all this stuff. So she's like, oh yeah, Pensacola Christian College. So I looked into it, and yeah, it's super strict, very conservative. But I couldn't deny when I looked at the art portfolios, even from their undergrad, there was something there. They said, this is the type of art I want to do. And it's just not a few people. It's like everyone they're graduating, the quality of the work was really good.
Right.
And one of the roadblocks I kind of went into is a lot of these schools, like the big name schools, like the Academy of Art and things like that, they wanted a portfolio for you to even apply. And I
Right.
was like, well, I've never really done art before. I know nothing,
Right. Right. Right.
basically. And so basically, how they had their art program set up is that they fashioned it off kind of like the old, like kind of apprentice,
Okay, like an
art
Atelier
apprentice.
program. Mhm.
Yeah, like, and it was very classical trained. So you did everything from life. You actually studied the names of all the muscles and the bones in your body,
Mhm.
to understand how they worked, to bring that to your drawing and your painting. Um, and so they just like built everything on each other. And really, like I said, it was geared towards figurative. It was geared towards kind of that classical tradition. Um, and I was really attracted to that. I wanted to learn how to interpret what I saw and communicate that in a painting. And they had it set up where you didn't have to have any knowledge or training or anything. You could come in green, like knowing nothing, and you basically had 2 years. And in those 2 years, you had to demonstrate that you could work hard enough and have some kind of talent or propensity towards it, that within 2 years you could submit a portfolio review, and pass and stay. So if after the 2 years you submitted a portfolio and they, looking at it, they said, hey, we don't think you'll be able to make it basically as an artist, then they don't
Mhm.
pass you and you have to change your major. So
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. And then it was also because it was a private school, they had a lot of different types of scholarship opportunities, and they had a work study program where you could work 30 hours a week, and that could go help pay for your tuition and things like that. So again, kind of starting over, not having a lot, I was like, that's great. I'll apply for that. Maybe I can get, a work scholarship. And so I ended up doing that. So at 24, 25, I moved. At that time, I was living, I had gone back to Michigan. So I moved from Michigan down to Florida. 25, didn't know anyone, never been to the school before. I was coming from, I won't go into on it, but pretty out there lifestyle, going into super conservative
Conservative Southern
Christianity.
Christian
So
school.
it was
Yeah.
very extreme from one to the other. But yeah, they accepted me. I had to go through some extra hoops because they asked, like, have you ever drank before? Have you ever done drugs? Like, have you ever like done this? So, you know, I didn't think they would take me, honestly. Like,
Right. Because on the checklist, they're looking for no, 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 and you're like, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
no. But yeah, they accepted me, and I got the work study scholarship, so I moved down there, started the undergrad, not knowing whether, you know, I'd make it, whether it would kick me out or, you know, but I one of their art professors there, which I think you're familiar with, Brian Jekyll. He's kind of the master artist in residence. He's really the one over the last, I don't know, 20 something years that has really fashioned the quality of that art program. And I really wanted to work with him. And he was very influential. He helped me a lot, gave me a lot of guidance through the undergrad and more in the master's program. But you know, there's some great teachers there. And actually, even though I didn't really like the very strict atmosphere, in a lot of ways, it did help me focus, and kind of coming out of a lot of that stuff. It just, yeah, just kind of honed. Everything was art. Like I didn't have much of a social life. I didn't really, you know, I was like, I'm 24, I'm starting over. Like, I got to be serious and focused, and you
right.
know, so I mean, I was working 30 hours a week, you know, taking 19, 20 credit hours. You know, if I wasn't working, I was in the studio working. You
Right.
know,
Right.
so
So, you know, sometimes when you're going through a situation like that, you're absolutely right. Being in a sometimes people need a structured, hardcore structured box to live in for a while.
yeah,
And it develops something in you when you do that. You know, it's just one of those things, especially when you come out of depending on what you come out of. You know, I was a volunteer chaplain at a drug rehab center. It was actually a prison for about 9 years, and they all did really good when they were in that box. You know, and it's like we used to say, it's real easy to stay clean and sober when you have to pee in a cup every
right,
night. You
right,
know, or you're going back to hardcore prison, you know, because they
right,
were in a minimal security prison, but it was a rehab program. So
yeah,
they had to go get a job. They had to go do these things, but they'd have to come back every night
wow,
and pee in a cup. And it was like, if they failed, they went back to real prison, and with usually 10 years. So they were like, you know, but when they got out, they weren't in the box anymore. And
right.
it's like, so sometimes we need a good hard box to live in, but obviously it paid off for you because you learned a work ethic. Because I've known you long enough to know that when you're in the studio, you are a workhorse. You know, you don't play. And it shows. You know, you've definitely got a polish to your work, and also a volume to your work that speaks to a strong professional ethic. You know, my friend Matt always says you can't expect professional results when you have hobbyist habits.
Yeah.
And so there you go.
Yes, that is very true.
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, let's show off some of your work, and then we'll get back into. Let's show that first painting that you talked about from fishing with your grandfather.
Yeah.
I just love that. I just love that story. I have a lot of memories fishing with my dad. My dad is an absolute fishing fanatic, and he has more fishing equipment than you and I have art supplies combined.
Oh man.
Yeah, and he actually he caught a bad bass are not big like they are down here. I'm from northern New Hampshire, and he caught in Maine an almost a 10-pound bass.
Okay.
And that was like, everybody thought it's got to be the state record for the state of Maine. Up there, it's a huge bass. For all of us, we thought it was a huge bass. Down here, that's laughable. But up there, that's like, how big is that bass? You know, it's like crazy. So, but this picture reminds me of that. So let's show this one off. And what was the name of this one again?
Yeah, so this one's called The Perfect Cover. It's a 22 by 28 oil on linen. But yeah, there's something, you know, a lot of living in Florida. I've really done a lot of saltwater species, but there's something about the freshwater, specifically bass, that I'm really attracted to, that I really love. So I try to do freshwater pieces as well. But this has just been a favorite piece of mine. Like I said, it was inspired by the many trips I would take with my grandfather. He loved bass fishing. And I always thought lily pads, especially underwater, they kind of remind me of an alien almost environment, an alien forest. Um, there's just something kind of like mystical and magical about it. You kind of have these long tendrils with the flat pads on the top of the water. And you kind of get the light streaming through where it's kind of just all kind of like bouncing everywhere. So because of the lily pads interrupting the light, you don't always have that constant light source that's from one direction. So there's a
Right.
lot of unexpected light and shadow qualities that happen a lot. I've seen more in that as I've gone diving in springs and rivers and lakes and things like that that have some of these features. Um, you just don't see some of the colors and the lighting in saltwater the way that you do in freshwater with some of these underwater structures. So it's just it's a fun thing to paint and try to figure out different ways of capturing that feeling and that mood and that lighting of what it's like underwater, and playing with all the different types of cast shadows that go on under there. So it's just really fun.
Yeah, it really is. One of the things and for me, that's one of the aspects of your art that really draws me is the way that you capture the way that light hits objects underwater. A lot of artists struggle with that. You know, people, you see a lot of artists, they're painting fish or whatever, and they don't have that aspect of the light hitting the fish. You know, the way it bounces around on that. And that to me is something that you have an absolute mastery of. You can tell that you've been underwater a lot
Yeah. Well, I
yourself
think,
because you're an avid scuba diver.
yeah, I love scuba diving, snorkeling, anything I can to get in the water.
It's a rough place to live around here, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's great. I think, it's so funny thinking about that dream when I was little, and being able to breathe underwater.
Mhm.
Um, Not having a concept or knowledge of what scuba diving is. And then after moving to Florida, I mean, one of the first things I did after I decided, this was the subject matter I really wanted to do, was to get scuba certified. And that day when I went out and I got a taste of being underwater and breathing underwater, where you reach this state where what they call neutral buoyancy, where it's basically you're counteracting the pressure and the different things of the salt water with weights to where you perfectly become weightless.
Right.
And you really feel like you're floating. They say it's the closest thing anyone can experience to being in space, what it's like to be in space.
Right.
And there is something, I mean, if you ever get a chance to try it, I don't know if have you ever tried?
Oh yeah, yeah. I scuba
Okay,
dive.
yeah, yeah. So there's no other feeling like it. It almost feels like you're physically weightless, but you're mentally and emotionally weightless. Everything kind of stops and gets very quiet, and everything's just kind of moving around you. And I mean, it's very ethereal. There's not really anything like it. So definitely painting some of those things underwater. I think to really get a feel for what that is, you just have to observe it. You have to just spend time looking at it, not through a camera, not through pictures, but you got to be there yourself looking at
To
it. And you're
see
just
it.
not going to get a feel for that lighting unless you spend some time observing it. But also studying it, like, with representational figurative painting. I mean, you paint what you see, but sometimes you also paint what you know. So sometimes understanding, like you can look at a model sitting, a life model, and you can see how the light and the shadows fall on her or him and be painting that. But there's a certain level of understanding, if you actually understand what the muscle is doing when they're holding their arm a certain way or how that muscle is turning, that knowledge of the muscle structure can really help you bring a
Right.
level of realism and anatomy to it that you wouldn't have just from painting what you're observing. It just gives you a deeper understanding for what's actually happening. And I think
Right.
it's the same way. I do the same thing then with the wildlife art, the underwater art. Um, I talked a lot in my undergrad thesis, or my master's thesis. I talked about a lot about science actually.
Mm-hmm.
So going out and actually studying, okay, like I can observe that the light is doing this underwater, but what is actually happening from a scientific aspect? Like, why does it look like that? And so studying light and water and how, water acts as a prism and a magnifier and what it's actually doing to the light as it comes in, and creating certain patterns, and when you would see certain patterns and when you wouldn't see them, depending on whether it's cloudy or full sun or whether the water's choppy or still. Like all of those things, studying that really gave me a deeper understanding for what's actually going on underwater. And
Mm-hmm.
then that has really helped me develop the style and the approach and why I make certain decisions with how I paint that light.
Amazing, amazing. Let's go ahead and look at some more paintings of underwater here. Now, I like the bass one, obviously very close to the water. Here's another one, right at the surface. And I've swam with both of these, and to me, it's exciting. There's nothing like swimming with a sea turtle. I'm just sorry. There's nothing when you get to swim with a sea turtle. And there's this spot in it's actually in Panama City proper. There's a little rock wall that goes out off of Beach Drive and Frankfurt Avenue. Now, I know those of you that are watching online may not know where that is,
Yeah.
but there shouldn't be certain things, but yet I have seen more sea turtles in this spot and swam with them. And usually the smaller ones, like the size of like a dinner plate,
Right.
like this big, small ones. And, just swimming with a sea turtle is the greatest. And then the other thing is when it's a perfect day, and you're in the water with a jellyfish. To me, I've been in the water. I've been in like 60 feet of water, and seeing a jellyfish. It was huge. It was like a car.
Yeah.
And its tendrils went down so far I couldn't see anymore.
Wow.
And it looked like a crystal chandelier. Just the light, all the different aspects of it. It looked like a piece of crystal chandelier. Now, God help me if I would have swam into it, but would have been a good day. But the thing was just gigantic, and it was huge. But to me, it looked like it was carved out of glass, just floating in the water.
Yeah.
They're so beautiful, and you've captured that in this painting so well. Both of some of my favorite things to swim with. So tell us. Oh, look at that! Look, Monsieur, you made me talk French.
Yeah. So everything that you're describing, I feel very similar to you. I love watching jellyfish underwater, and some jellyfish they kind of create their own light source too. So they're not just reflecting the light, but they actually are. Can't think of the term right now, but basically they almost have like their own glowing quality to them.
Yeah, like a bioluminescence.
Yeah, bioluminescence. That's it. So I'm very intrigued by that. I'm also very intrigued by the fact that jellyfish are living creatures, but they have no heart. They have no brain. They have no blood. So anything we think about what makes something alive, they don't have any of those, and yet
Right.
They're still alive. A living creature, and so I think that's really fascinating. And this piece, it's called Ambrosia, and the reason why it's called Ambrosia is I was actually studying some more about these jellyfish, and you can actually look this up. This is pretty incredible. Just this year, within the last 2 years, new studies have been coming out from the scientific community that physically these jellyfish, specifically the moon jellyfish, that they appear to grow younger physically as they age, which is crazy to me.
Yeah, that's pretty wild.
But yeah, they call them the god jellyfish, or like the godlike jellyfish, because they seem to be ageless or to get younger. And
so the older they get, the younger they get.
Yeah.
I need some of those genes in me.
Yeah, so that's why I called it Ambrosia, because Ambrosia was the food of the
gods. Food of the gods, right?
Yeah. So this kind of came out of that. I was out diving, and this turtle kind of was swimming over me, and there was all these jellyfish in the water. And they were, like you said, they were really big. I mean, some of the moon jellyfish, they're small, but some of them can be quite big. And it was actually one of those moments where I was so focused in on what on the turtle and watching him that I didn't really notice how many jellyfish there were. And I was swimming backwards so I could kind of get this shot and kind of observe it kind of like swimming above me. And I swam right into, I don't know, probably 20 or 30 of them, of these big guys. And I had been stung before, but I got stung so many times. I freaked out just a little bit. I had to get out of the water because I don't know if you've been stung a lot, but I had enough stings where pretty much all my extremities went numb, or like my whole body was on fire, like tingling from like the roof of my head to the bottom
Oh
of my feet.
man.
Like almost when I was like, do I need to go to the hospital? Like,
Oh
am I
no.
okay? So that was kind of like a freaky moment, but you know, I just, you know, calm down, you take deep breaths, kind of let the feelings pass or whatever. But they're just so beautiful. I stayed out there as long as I can, just watching these jellyfish move through the water, the light hitting off of them. And they really do, when they're out of the water, you don't see too much color. But when they're in the water and the light's hitting them, they really glow this kind of really bright, almost neon pink at times. It's a really, really pretty thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful painting, and yeah, sea turtles are. I love the name of it and the story behind it. You know, the ambrosia. You know, the food of the gods, and that's probably why sea turtles live hundreds of years, because they're eating the immortal jellyfish. That totally makes sense to me. That makes sense to me. What a great! I mean, it's not only are you showing great art, you're dropping the science stuff, and so we're geeking out on so many levels. This is the best. Now, this painting is huge. And when I say huge, it's not like huge because you do murals.
Yeah,
you just did a mural just down the road from the studio here at the dive shop, one of the dive shops here in town, and you did a beautiful mural.
Oh, thank you.
And it's now that, how many feet long was that one?
Honestly, I'm not sure. I think it was between 40 and 50 feet long.
I was going to say at least,
and about 12 feet tall.
Yeah. So basically you painted a giant billboard.
Yeah.
On a building, she painted a giant billboard, but on stucco. So that is not a friendly thing to paint on.
Yeah, it's one of those things, you know, different projects, you know, some of that I might have been able to prep the surface to kind of smooth that down or whatever, but for this project I really couldn't do any of that. So I definitely felt like I bit off a little bit more that I could chew, or I just never had painted on that stucco-y, I guess, a surface. So it took a lot longer and a lot more paint that I was planning on, but
that's usually the way.
It came together. You know, you always have a little bit when you're trying something a little bit different, you know, this little bit of fear and trepidation. You're like, okay, like I can do this. And then after about, you know, you're in it about 30% of the way, you're like, oh no, like
what have I done?
It's not gonna turn out. What did I do? Like, this is gonna be an epic failure.
Yeah, that happens. That happens sometimes. Now let's look at this painting. This one is really huge. It appears to be huge. How big is this painting that I'm about to show?
Yeah, so that it's like 20. It's kind of a weird size. It's 27 inches tall by 79 inches long.
Oh wow! And what's it painted on?
It's painted on linen. I stretched it. So basically it's kind of an odd size because I'll look sometimes at art supply stores like they have a Blick warehouse in Atlanta and stuff like that that have frame shops and things like that. And sometimes people will order something, like they'll have some kind of custom order and they'll never pick it up, or they'll, you know, or they made something and they accidentally made it the wrong size. But it's still like really awesome. And this was one of those times I'd gone into an art supply store. Someone had ordered stretcher bars for a painting that they wanted stretched, and they never came in and picked up the stretcher bars. And it was a really odd size. So it was something like a fraction of the cost of what it would take for me to get the pieces and the time to like build it.
Right.
But I'm like, oh man, this is really cool. It's almost basically a 1-to-3 ratio. So triple as long as it is tall. Like that's a really cool size. It's really big, and I love painting big when I can. I was like, I'm gonna pick this up just for a personal project. So yeah, I bought the stretcher bars already built, and then I stretched my own linen on it, and then worked on it. This was one of kind of my personal projects I did during the COVID-19 shutdown.
Mm-hmm.
I just been doing a lot for galleries and shows and all this stuff. And then when kind of all that stuff got canceled and I just found more time in the studio, just thinking about what I wanted to work on next. And I just really felt like, as I was praying about it, hey, like what series, what all the stuff I should do, that kind of God was leading me back to, hey, like, take this time and do some stuff that reconnects to why I called you to do what I've called you to do, and kind of that initial inspiration, and just something you really love to paint that you don't necessarily get the chance to paint because of the business demand. So whales have, because of the dreams and everything, they've always been my favorite. um, I've always felt a strong connection to them and affinity to them, and they're one of the animals that I still have not had the opportunity to actually get in the water with.
I was going to
I've
ask
seen,
if you had or
yeah,
not. Yeah.
I've seen
Wow.
them from a boat, but I've never gotten in the water with one. And so this kind of like time of COVID where we've been very isolated, quarantined at different times, all that kind of stuff. This has been a special project because it's returning to that original inspiration. It's painting my favorite animal, something that my current galleries don't really ask for. Um, but also kind of painting a dream, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
a past dream and a future dream, where, right now I dive and work with conservation groups that protect and research local species like turtles and dolphins. But eventually I would love to work with whales and collaborate with some conservation groups where I'm going out on the boat, maybe on a research vessel that's following their migration for a couple months, study what they do, learn about what they're doing, take photos, get in the water with them, all this kind of stuff, and then bring those experiences, bring those photographs, those sketches, and what I've learned from working with these naturalists and conservationists, and create pieces of work about these creatures, and then use a portion of the proceeds to help continuing on the research, and studying them and protecting them and all that kind of stuff, because there's so much about them we just don't understand. But they're super intelligent. The largest mammal on earth. It's just crazy. So this is me, yeah, just painting my past and future dreams. And yeah, this is one of my favorites. So I don't
Oh,
I don't
that's
know if I'll sell it or not. I
you
don't
might. Yeah.
actually.
Sometimes you make a painting, and you're like, you'd love to sell it for the money, but at the same time, you're like, I really like that painting. I want to keep it. That's a tough call. Every artist struggles with that. You have that one painting you're proud of and you want to keep, and
Right.
yeah,
Well,
you might sell
yeah,
it.
I mean, there'll be more. I've kind of been working on a series of whale pieces, but that one's just kind of special. And I in the painting, so you have all those dolphins kind of
Hmm.
swimming out in front of it. So this is kind of a little bit more of like the science coming in here. Um, Even though I've not been in the water with a humpback yet, I've seen them, and I try to learn as much about them as possible. And one of the things I really find fascinating about them is that there's this event in nature that's called a superpod. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen, and it's where um, different types of animals within the cetacean group, so whales, dolphins, porpoises, killer whales, they'll actually get together and they'll migrate together for hundreds of miles. So, and sometimes in thousands. So you'll get like a pod of like 20, 30 whales, and maybe up to like 1,000 dolphins. They've documented this will come together and they'll swim in one giant group. Um,
Right.
and they said they think they do it for a couple reasons. One, especially in maybe a harder year so far as for food, the dolphins kind of help school the fish to the whales, and it makes feeding a lot easier. And then the whales, just because of their size, offer a lot of protection to the smaller dolphins during part of maybe these harder migratory patterns when they're out in deep water and not around a lot of sea
Right. You can
creatures,
see a shark going, I'm not messing with that. It's a lot of dolphins and whales and
yeah.
that kind of thing.
I just find that fascinating, and I love that. So that was kind of what I was painting there, a moment of that superpod, kind of the dolphins coming alongside the whale.
It's fun to geek out about stuff like that. When you're working in not only your passion, and your calling, it's like when you can bring your passion and your calling together, and then you're working in something that you love. It, what's the old saying is, if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life.
Yeah,
that's not true, because it's hard work.
No. Yeah, it's funny. Like, me and my husband, he's also a painter and artist, and we have this discussion all the time. Like, people will talk to us, and it's kind of like this idea, like, to be an artist and make it, you're imbued with this like supernatural power, So it's not hard work. It's just like, because you have this like supernatural artistic ability. Like, you just go in and you just can produce these wonderful works, and it's just so easy,
Right.
And it's
right.
like, I do think there's an aspect of some people have more of maybe a natural propensity, or they pick up on certain things artistically more naturally.
Right.
But, I do agree. It takes a lot of dedication, a lot of hard work. There's not shortcuts.
Right. There's not. Michelangelo, there's a quote from Michelangelo that I just love. He said, if people knew how hard I had to work to gain my mastery, they wouldn't think it was so wonderful.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I think that's the balance of it. Because, I've definitely talked to a lot of artists who've been around for a long time. I even studied older artists like Norman Rockwell and some of these really famous artists, where they were very open about it, how, their drive in some ways became so extreme where their family really suffered.
Yes. Yeah, it can.
And it's something, before, as a young artist, before I got married, I was like, I'm never going to marry an artist, there'll be too many conflicts and too many, like, what if we're doing the same thing and one person, does really well and the other person doesn't well? Will it cause like marital strife and
right.
these things? But I'm married to an artist now, a really excellent artist, and it's something I'm really grateful for now, and something we talk about a lot, because they have a certain level of understanding into like an artist mindset, or their drive, or kind of the different ways that they see the world. And so you really can't, there's this really beautiful mutual understanding, I guess, and room to pursue those things for each other, because we both understand what it's like to be an artist and have this creative drive, and knowing that it's something you only get better by giving it more time and attention.
Right.
And then it just helps balance out. So, we're constantly checking in kind of with each other, like, hey, like, do you need to spend like this many hours in the studio? I totally get it. Don't worry about it. Like, today, if you need to do that, like, I'll take care of the house and the dishes or whatever. But then also checking and say, like, hey, like, we've been working a lot on our projects. Like, do we need some time? Do we need to go on a date? Like,
yeah. Got to do some of those things too. There's got to be that balance, and it is hard. People that are not artists just don't always understand that drive and that passion, and it's tough. You can get into strife, if the person doesn't get it, because, most people, they want to come home from their job.
Right.
And they don't want to work, and they want to do other things, and most people, their passions are hobbies.
Right.
And so when your passion is your job, you don't want to clock out. You know what I mean? You just don't. And it's like, and they're like, well, you work 20 hours straight. I'm like, yeah, and I'm loving every minute of it. It's like, I worked 20 hours today in front of me. I didn't move. I stayed in front of an easel for 20 hours. I mean, I took breaks in between, but I put in a 20-hour day, and I'm totally great with it. I'm exhausted, but it was the best day I ever had.
Yeah.
Most people are like, that just sounds horrible, you know, but they also, you know, it's like, I tell this joke all the time, but it's actually true. A friend of mine, one time he called me up to vent about his job. And he was like, oh, Tim, you know, my boss, my this, my day. And he was just venting to me, you know, and then he felt bad because he hadn't even asked me how my day was. And he goes, oh man, he said, dude, I'm sorry. You know, he's like, I know I've been venting. He said, I didn't ask you, how was your day? And I'm like, you don't want to know. And he's like, no, tell me, how was your day? I'm like, you're just going to get mad at me? And he's like, no, how? So I told him, I said, all right. I said, well, I spent the day drawing a pineapple surfing. And he was like, shut up, I hate you. Like, I told you, you know, I'm like, you're the one that wanted to be an accountant, you know? Like,
yeah, it's, you know, it's hard too, because it's like, you know, everyone's a little bit different, their personality. So I'm an artist, but I you know, most people think of artists as right-brained, but I'm more of a left-brain. So I like structure, I like plans and lists and schedules, you know, and all that kind of stuff, which definitely helps on the business side of things.
yes.
But it does sometimes make more of the artistry difficult, because still there's that aspect of what you're talking about where, you know, you can work 20 hours straight. But, you know, sometimes things just flow. And some things don't. And so it, you know, I might have a plan, but when I go into it, sometimes things are just not working.
Right.
And then, you know, you're struggling 5-6 hours on something that should only take an hour.
Right.
And there's all these things that are affecting it that sometimes you're not even aware of, or that you would like not to affect it. Like, you know, sometimes, you know, life stressors are coming into play, or maybe you have a conflict with a family member, or, you know, all of these things, like, they kind of affect it. So sometimes you're going in, like, I need to get all this stuff done, I need to paint it, and things are just, they're not working.
Right.
So at that point, but you still have these demands or these things that people expect of you. And so it's that fine balance between, I want to work when things are flowing and good, and you know, the things that I'm thinking about and I'm watching or listening to, they all kind of like they kind of all make their way into my work. So it's kind of like, I might not be feeling so great today, but I have all these demands, and so I still need to paint. And I think that's what kind of differentiates people from, like, who are hobbyists and professionals. It's like, you have to be disciplined to say, you know, I might not be feeling it today. It might feel like a struggle today, but I'm still going to go to the studio. I'm still going to choose to surround myself with things that are positive and uplifting and inspiring, that are going to help me in spite of what's going on in the other areas of my life. And I'm going to work.
And you know, that's the thing, you know, it's like, you know, those professional practices. When I was getting my master's degree, there was a class that was a mandatory class. You couldn't get your master's unless you took this class, and it was called professional practices. And it was basically just that. Yeah. How do you make it as a professional artist? What are the things you have to do to make a living as an artist? And the biggest one is just what you're talking about. Professional practices is, you get in the studio and you do the work. You do the things that you have to do. You have a schedule, just like a real job. If you were at a job punching a clock, and we've all had to do that. You know, every artist that has ever artist in the history of artists has had to punch a clock for somebody else at one point in their careers, you know? And, you know, myself, it's like, I worked in the commercial art field, both in graphic design and commercial art, since I was 19 years old. Yeah. And I've only been a full-time fine artist for less than 5 years now. Right. And so it's like, I work more now than I did then. And there was a point where I was working 4 jobs. Yeah. You know, I was working 4 jobs, and it was like, I was working like an animal. And I work more now in the studio here than I did, more hours in a week than I did working 4 jobs. Yeah. And it's like, it's crazy. People don't understand. And it's, but if you don't do the work, you know, and the other side to it as an artist, you know, that, if you want to get paid, you got to do the work,
Right.
you know, because
Right.
it's a different animal.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing. And I want to talk to you about that because, you know, you're in a couple galleries,
Yeah.
but you also sell direct, you know, via online sales and things like that. When you're an artist and you're selling your fine art, it's not like a regular job in the income stream. You're not getting paid every week, guaranteed. Right. You're getting it. You may get a big bunch here and then nothing, and then a big bunch and then nothing, or then maybe this much and then this much. You know, it's a constant. So you gotta be good at budgeting. Number one.
Yeah. So yeah. You know, I definitely think there's a temptation. When you make a big sale, you're like, oh man, I just made like this many like 1,000 or whatever in one shot or whatever. And you're like, oh yeah, I want to like go out and like, you know, celebrate or whatever. But again, you're coming back to the fact like, yeah, this is wonderful privilege and awesome. I get to do this for a living and I really enjoy it, but it is a job.
Right.
And so you have to do things to make sure that your job is sustainable, that it has longevity, and realizing, you know, you might be making, you know, you might sell a painting for $4,000, but you just can't go out and spend it because how much have you actually already spent in selling that $4,000 painting? So a
Right.
lot of that is just consistently for every piece that you're making, you keep track of what is actually going into it, how many hours you're spending, how much you're spending on paint, on canvas, on marketing that piece,
Right.
on framing, on shipping.
Mm-hmm.
All of those are all expenses that you have at your website, all that stuff.
Right.
And it adds up a lot. So
it really does.
And then if you're working with a gallery, you're paying them 50% of what, or
right.
more.
Or more. Yeah. It's usually 50 to 60%.
Of what you're selling. And so, yeah, your paycheck coming in might say you made $4,000, but by the time you deduct all your overhead from your power and
right, you made 1,500. Yeah.
What are you actually making, profiting on
right.
these? And it's actually not that much. And I think a lot of people in the art community don't actually understand that. And that's kind of where the starving artist comes from. One, maybe because maybe they're not being, you know, it's a hobby and they're not being like dedicated to it. But two, it's an expensive thing to make.
Yes.
That takes a lot of time. And you're not really profiting that much, at least not in the beginning.
Right.
But still for people, I mean, it is a lot of money to drop $4,000 on a painting. I mean, I couldn't afford right now to go out.
Right.
And buy
yeah. Most artists couldn't afford to buy their own work.
Yeah. Yeah. But realistically, if I were to break down that $4,000 profit, I'm probably not even, I might be profiting 1,000.
Right.
Maybe.
Yeah.
The reality is a lot of times, and this is like kind of the disheartening thing, it's like, oh, I, you know, sold a $4,000 painting and then I might receive like 1,900 of that from the gallery. And then I deduct, you know, the cost. And this is the thing too here where you kind of have to decide in the beginning kind of how you're going to do things. So in the beginning, I started out using a certain quality of paint, certain quality of brushes, certain quality of surfaces. Maybe that were, you know, maybe a little bit not as expensive. So there's different, you know, there's different realms, I guess, of art supplies.
Right. There really is.
The better quality, the more expensive they are. So that means on your end, the less profit you're going to have. So you kind of have to weigh, okay, and do I want to make more profit in the beginning, or do I want to use better quality materials? That's gonna
right.
So for me, it's been a little bit more of a journey, a little bit more struggle. You know, I've definitely had the time where I've been working 3 or 4 jobs because maybe I was having these sales, but my profit was very low. And because initially I started out wanting, you know, even from the get-go, of course I'm going to grow in my skill and my knowledge and all these things. But from the get-go, I wanted to start using the same type of materials that these people who had been painting, for 20, 30 years,
Right.
were selling paintings for tens of thousands of dollars, use as close to the similar quality materials as they were, so that I would establish myself as someone who has quality. So I was willing to sacrifice the first few years. Even now I'm still doing it, but sacrifice some of my profits in order to have better quality materials.
Right.
Now, if you're really skilled, you can use some really cheap paints or whatever and get a pretty good product. But overall, the longevity of it down the road.
Right. Yeah. The archival, how long it lasts.
Quality is maybe
Yeah.
great.
And not only that, I found that, especially with paints, professional quality paints. And then it's like you get like when you if you go to a box art store, like a Hobby Lobby, a Michael's, or things like that, a Dick Blick, their professional quality paints are here. But what people don't realize is there's like 50 tiers above professional that are all professional paints, but there's like 1,000 levels of that, and you can spend, like, when you go to a box art store and you buy professional paint, you may be spending $20 a tube, as opposed to you can get a tube half that size and spend $600.
Oh yeah.
For the same color, it's just a professional.
Yeah.
It was a hand ground, handmade, a super high quality paint. But the one thing I have noticed though is that quality matters. Once you start painting with the really high end professional paints, you go, oh, I do see the difference. And they last longer to me. They go a lot longer because I have such a higher pigment count.
Yeah.
Are you getting ready to show us one?
I'm gonna give a little shout out here. So actually, I just started probably 2 months ago. It was kind of one of those times where, like, okay, it's time to go to the kind of the next level in quality. I've always used like professional grade, but this is probably the most expensive professional paint. But this is a Michael Harding. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
And it was really cool. I'm a member of the American Society of Marine Artists, and I did a conference with them right before the shutdown with COVID and everything. I was in a show with them, and they were super kind, and they gifted me a set of these. Michael Harding was there giving a presentation about his paints, and they gifted me a set. And I used them, and I was like, well, never going back to anything else.
Yeah.
But they come with a price tag, but it is well worth it. And one of the reasons is basically Michael Harding, when he was a student, he was like, I study these paintings in the museums. I just can't get my colors to look like this. I'm studying their mixtures.
Struggling, yeah.
And it does not have the vibrancy and the transparency and the luminosity of my paint. So he started studying what they used. And he's like, oh, all these guys were making their own paints by hand, and it's literally just pigment and oil. That's all there is.
There's no fillers. There's no
fillers.
And that's
even some of these really high end brands, like some of them still use fillers. But that's why they're a little bit more affordable, or they a lot of people, they're professional, but they have like these fillers in them. Which is very common. It's less common to see these because they're manufacturing them in such a large quantity, right? It's in a warehouse or a factory that's they're cranking out all this color. So he wanted to create something that was like their paints. So he literally, like, when it says cobalt, there's real, like, the mineral.
Right, it's cobalt.
Like, he's going out and he's finding these places, getting these minerals and these stones and all these things, and hand grinding them up and making his own pigment, and then adding the oil. And they're 90% pigment and 10% oil, and that's literally all that's in them. Right. And this tiny little tube, it's heavy. Like, it's crazy.
You can tell. Yeah, that's the thing.
Like I've used a lot of Gamblin, and I still use some Gamblin paints. They're wonderful buttery paints. But even just like holding up the Gamblin to the Michael Harding, you could just tell there was so much more bang for your buck, like, in here. And so it is a lot of cost up front to buy
Yeah.
paints like this, but they last a really long time.
They do. They
And
last
the
a lot longer.
luminosity of the color is just incredible. Like, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
you
it's
can't
like
beat
once
them.
you try like a triple primed linen or
Mhm.
whatever, you're like, oh, I can never paint on cotton again.
Now let's talk about, you know, we're talking about paints. Let's talk about your
Yeah.
palette real quick. What do you think of oh, we got some comments. Let's show off some of your comments. Let's see here. Christy John says she was talking about the paintings, and she said that they're she says beautiful with a big heart. That's definitely Christy. And then Rob Woodrum, who actually went plein air painting with me last week on the show.
Awesome.
We went under the Hathaway Bridge and we were painting together. He says, stunning. I love it. I love it. He is a great friend of mine and a great friend of the show. So, but that's great that we got some comments. I like that. Like, people are watching. Watch out. But when you were talking about the quality of the paints and things like that, and, you know, using those things, do you use like, what's your palette look like when you're using your palette? Let's get a little technical here, because a lot of the artists that are watching, they're like, okay, like they're looking at that beautiful painting of the koi fish behind you that I just absolutely love, because I got a fishy. My wife teases me because I call them my fishy friends, and we have an aquaponics garden that's fed by a pond. I made a pond. We have goldfish in there, and minnows and different things, catfish. And so the water from the pond feeds the plants.
Oh, that's cool.
And then, because the fishy water fertilizes the plants, and then the plants, then it falls back in and aerates the pond.
Oh man, I'd actually check that out sometime.
It's wicked fun. It's wicked fun. But I go out there and I talk to them, and they those are my fishy friends, and I feed them. So that's what they look like when they come up for their food. You know, it's a blast. So, but when you're using, do you use, like, what's your palette? Do you use a lot of colors? Do you use specific colors? Are you a limited palette? Like, I'm a big limited palette. I use pretty much 3 colors, black and white. Every now and then I'll throw in some earth tones just to speed up, my earth tones. But what about you? What's your palette typically look like?
Yeah, so I think it's something I get comfortable using a certain setup, and I like to be consistent about my setup and what I use. But every once in a while, I like to experiment, maybe try a different color or something like that, add something. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So I feel like my palette sometimes is still evolving a little bit. But consistently, the colors I always use is usually a titanium white.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess mine would be, I don't know, I never thought of my palette as limited, but some people say it is a more limited palette. I basically use a warm and a cool version of each of the primaries.
Okay.
So usually that's like a titanium white, like a lemon yellow or a cad yellow, a yellow ochre, then usually a cad red light. It's kind of like this vibrant reddish color here. A alizarin, like a permanent alizarin or a permanent rose. Those are very similar color. And then like a cobalt blue, an ultramarine, and then for a lot of my more aqua colored scenes, I have a phthalo blue. So I usually have 3 blues on my palette: the phthalo, the cobalt, and the ultramarine. And then I have what I call like my convenience colors, or colors that just help mixing a little bit more, or I use them to neutralize colors to bring down that vibrancy. I'll usually have like a viridian green, a Van Dyke brown. It's very similar to like a burnt umber, but it's a little bit more transparent. It's less green, and I would say it mixes better. I found it mixes better with blues. It neutralizes them without tinting them green. Which I think some of those other browns they tend to do. So I usually use those 2 colors more for neutralizing the green, to mix into if I have more intense colors like my oranges and my reds and things like that. And then I use the Van Dyke brown to neutralize some of those blues to bring down the saturation. But that's pretty much my whole palette. the white, the cool, one warm and one cool of each.
Right, a warm and a cool of every color.
Yeah,
so it is a limited palette, but you have 2 of each color, pretty much.
Yes, yeah, warm and cool. And that helps with, so me, I would say, because I'm left-brained, I tend to lean more towards being more comfortable and confident and drawn to the drawing. And I would say I am less inclined or talented when it comes to color. So being expressive with color, even being expressive with brushstrokes, which is something like I've really worked hard to develop, because I tend to, when I paint, just like get in there and be all super detailed, you know, and paint really photorealistic. But I don't want to paint that way. It's not kind of what my heart craves when I look at art, or how I want my art to look. So I've been kind of developing that, and painting with a simpler palette. Really, it helps me with my color mixing, because it basically helps me to break down the colors into the overall temperatures, you know, like whether it's warm light or cool light, the shadows. So, you know, a lot of people think having a few colors on your palette is very limiting, but I actually find it to be very liberating, because it simplifies the mixing process, and then but still allows for room for you to get a lot of different variety of color, just by adding a little bit more red, or a little bit more blue, or a little bit more yellow. And having that, like I said, that warm and cool version helps keep the color and the light and the color and the shadows consistent.
Right, and that also gives you color harmony. Your colors tend to be in the same families and everything else, because you're using such a limited thing. But that a lot of people want to know about that. Like, okay, how did she get that, and what is she doing? What are the, you know, like what kind of brushes is she using? What kind of this do you use? Do you have like a particular brush that you use? Now I know that you paint a lot with palette knives.
Yeah. So that's part of my style too, is that I really love some of the textures you can get with palette knife. And as I was developing my style, I saw a lot of people, you know, they would paint the whole painting with a palette knife.
Right.
Or someone would paint the whole painting with a brush. And so part of developing my style is kind of mixing the two in a way where it's not obvious, like, oh, all of that was done with palette knife, or all of that was done with brushwork. That really bringing the best of both worlds into the same painting. And so a lot of times I can show you here. It's kind of like dirty, but this is one of my favorite palette knives. I use this a lot. It's extremely flexible, so I can bend that almost. I mean, that's how much it's bending. So it's very, very flexible. It's a triangle shape, so it's got this wide section here and then the thin section here. So I can get some really nice lines, and then cover a lot of area with texture. And then because it is so flexible, I can actually scoop up a bunch of paint and turn it sideways, build up the paint along this edge, and then actually kind of basically draw with it. I can move it around, and this will bend like this as I'm moving it. So I actually can get some really cool, interesting marks with this. And normally I'll save this though for the end. So as I'm building the painting, you know, I start with really thin layers of color. I'll usually block it in with a larger brush. I'm really hard on my brushes, so they're not super pretty looking. But this is a Rosemary & Co brush. This is a size 12. A lot of times, to be a little bit more painterly or not focus too much on the details in the beginning, I use a larger brush than I think I need. So if I grab a brush,
that is, you know what? I'm glad you said that, because that is like, people don't understand. You want to get me yelling at my students? I don't yell. I'm like, what are you doing? Like that. They're painting this giant canvas, and they're using like a number 1.
Yeah, like they're painting the whole painting, like.
Yes, and it's like, what are you doing? You know, and then they concentrate on the details first.
Right.
And then it's like, no, start vague. Get a brush, like you said. You get a brush that's too big than what you think you should be using.
Yeah. I'll pick up a brush if it feels comfortable. I'm like, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'll
One
put
of
it
my
back.
one of my
This
art
is my
instructors
report,
told me that.
12.
He says whatever brush you think is too big, pick the one bigger than that.
Yeah.
That's pretty that's good to know. See that, guys, you learn something every time you watch the show, and that's an important one. Paint with a bigger brush. So you use big brushes and you basically start vague and then you tighten everything up.
Yeah.
But at
So,
the end you use the palette knife.
yeah, near the end I'll use the palette knife. Just the nature of it, you can get a lot of thick paint on there, and then it doesn't have hairs like a brush, so it's not absorbing the paint. So you can get a lot on at one time. So I kind of wait for that at the end. And usually I'm only putting the thickest paint in the areas where whatever light source is on the painting or where those light rays are, that's where the thickest area of paint is. One, visually in the overall composition, the areas that have the light are usually the places in the painting that are closest to the viewer.
Right.
And so you add to that kind of three-dimensional feel by keeping the thicker areas of the painting in front, and then the areas of the painting that are receding to the back, you let those areas be thinner paint. And then two, there's actually this type of, I don't really know the term for it, but it's basically kind of like an optical illusion that's happening visually. When you're looking at a painting that's under a light in person, that light is basically hitting the painting and then being reflected back into your eye. And that light will hit the paint that's thickest, first. So by controlling and being intentional about where you're placing that thick paint in those light areas, you're telling the eye what to pay attention to and what to notice first. And when the light hits that thick paint and reflects back into your eye, it creates almost like a vibrating effect, and that's why some people will make comments when they look at my work in person. Oh, it looks like it's glowing. Or
Yes.
I've had people literally ask me if I put anything into my paint, and I don't.
Right.
Like, did you put glitter in there, or And what they're actually experiencing is that they're seeing the reflection of that light off those thick areas of paint that I put on with the palette knife, and it makes it appear as if it's luminescent or if it's glowing.
Right. And oil paint has that naturally in it anyway, because people don't realize they're looking at it looks opaque. It's never opaque.
Yeah.
It's never opaque. And so the light goes into the paint, and the oil causes it to bend. It refracts. And so, which means it splits the light from white light to the color spectrum.
Yeah.
And then it bounces off of all the pigment that's floating in that oil.
Yeah.
And reflects back at you. But as it's reflecting back at you, the color, it's also bouncing around and refracting. So you're getting reflection of the color, say yellow, blue, whatever the color is of the pigment. That's reflecting back at you. But the oil is causing a refraction of the light wave, which is changing the color.
Yeah.
And so that's why oil paints look different. You can tell when you're looking at an oil painting versus, say, an acrylic painting versus a gouache, where they all look different. But oil has that unique quality that you're getting both refraction and reflection. And then you're talking about the thickness of it causing other effects with lights and shadows just because of its viscosity, the thickness of the paint. So there's nothing like painting with oils. There really isn't. Now, you also at one point were painting over gold and silver leaf for a while too.
Yeah, I had a series that I did probably about 15, 20 works, where I was just experimenting with it, seeing what works and what doesn't work. So I was experimenting with using some of this gold leaf, silver leaf, even I used some copper. And basically I experimented with using it as kind of the way that you would tone a canvas. So toning a canvas a color and then painting and leaving some areas of the paint transparent so you see that color kind of showing through. So I was experimenting with doing that with the gold leaf, saying, hey, can I paint on top of this stuff?
Yes, you can.
And then leave it showing in certain areas. So I experimented with that some. And then I experimented with putting it on top where instead of the sheets, where it comes in sheets, crumbling it in pieces.
And sprinkling it on, yeah.
And then putting it in areas on top of the oil when the oil was a little dry, but not fully
Like
dry.
tacky.
A little tacky.
Yeah, at the tacky stage, yeah.
So some of those I felt were really successful. And those ones I sold, some of them were not very successful. But it was a really
that's the experimentation of art, though. You know, it really is.
Yeah, and I
want to say that's the show that you did at the show that my wife and I went to in Panama City.
I did, yeah.
And I want to say there was one painting you did, and it was a bunch of pompano fish. It was a small work, and I want to say that one was over silver leaf.
Oh yeah.
I remember that one, and you also had glitter in the paint too, a little bit.
Yeah, I had
some of it. So you were doing a little experimenting there. They looked fantastic. They really did.
Thank you.
You know.
Yeah, I just wanted to see how it would help, like, add to that feeling of kind of that sparkling nature of
underwater.
The light underwater. So I think, you know, I haven't really done any since that particular show. I really enjoyed it. And would like to do more. I think I would need to spend some more time doing it to really get a good handle on it. It's very messy. That's the only part I didn't like. It was everywhere, and I'm still finding a year later gold leaf in my studio. So I did.
Yeah, gold leaf gets everywhere. I work almost exclusively with gold leaf. I always paint over gold leaf. The Illuminated Messiah project and my angelology exhibit from years ago was 100% over gold and silver leaf. And I just absolutely love painting over gold. And silver. Silver leaf is pretty fun too. But there's something about the gold. But when you're doing the crumpling, it can get messy. I did one. It was a 24 by 36. And it was from the scripture of where Jesus said, I saw Satan cast down from heaven like lightning.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a painting of this giant lightning bolt coming down. Like it was that wide. The lightning bolt was like this wide and going down the painting, but it was all crumbled silver leaf and with a silhouette of a figure falling in the middle of it. That's all it was. But that it was like that thick when it was done because I did an acrylic pour over it so it would hold it down.
Gotcha.
Man, you talk about finding little pieces of it years later. Yeah. Yeah, it gets everywhere. It's so hammered thin, but it's fun. It's fun.
Yeah, it is. So I thought I'd like to do some more. That might be actually fun to ask you some about that. Maybe get your thoughts on some of it. Because I felt like there were a few pieces that I really liked. And I did sell several of them. Unfortunately, I sold some before that show, and they didn't want to lend them back. So some of them people didn't ever get to see. Yeah, I think there's a lot of room for discovery still in that area, and would like to do that more.
Little experimentation.
Yeah.
It's worth it. It's fun to experiment too. You know, as an artist, we're always having to evolve and grow and things like that. You want to find your niche, but at the same time, it's important to experiment as well.
Right.
And so, you know, it's one of those things. So this is your website, joyfulfineart.com.
Yes.
This is where people can order direct from you. So you get all of it? No commissions?
Well, this is kind of how it works. Like if you're selling directly through your studio and through a gallery, a lot of time, the important thing is that you're consistent in your pricing.
Oh, absolutely.
So I don't have a shopping cart on my website.
Oh, okay.
And I don't list my prices on there. But people can contact me. So basically I do this so that people can go online, they can look at my works, and they'll be able to see readily, like when you click on an image in one of the portfolios, there'll be a red dot on the corner, which will notify you whether it's sold or not. And when you click on one of those images, it'll basically pull up kind of like a gallery room where you can scroll through.
Right.
You can even see it on the wall. Like there's a little in-room feature, which is great. But it won't list the price of the piece, but it will list for you where you can purchase the work, whether through a gallery or through my studio.
Oh, that's great.
And then have a link for you to either contact them or to contact me.
Nice. So they click on that picture and it'll either send them to the gallery or straight to you for the
it'll show if they click on the image, it'll come up and say available through Curate Gallery, available through Annapolis.
You know, that's really great because, you know, that's that tough thing when artists are selling on their own. Obviously, you don't have to give a commission to anybody. It's 100% yours. You do make a higher profit there, obviously, but you also want to make sure that you're supporting the galleries that are supporting you.
Right.
And that's
why I don't do that. That way it communicates to my galleries that I'm not undercutting them.
Right.
Or trying to sell pieces online to someone that they have, you know, hanging right now on display. And then it kind of saves me some time. Because if someone really connects with the piece online where they're not able to see it in person, if they're interested, they're going to contact me.
Right.
You know, whereas someone, you know, if they see a price or whatever, they might be turned off. You know what I'm saying? Like they might see the price and then just never contact me.
Right.
Or they might see it and then contact me and there's like bartering going on.
Right.
They're trying to like get a different deal. But it's like if they have to go through the extra little effort, you know, to contact me to try to find out a price, that gives me an opportunity to have more of a conversation with them.
Right. And that's an important thing.
Kind of builds more of a connection that way.
Right. You know, a lot of people don't understand. It's like the price is the least of the person's worry. It really is. Now, if it's too high, they'll be like, well, you know, they'll try to haggle.
Yeah.
But for the most part, nobody buys art because they think they can afford it.
Right.
Nobody buys art because it's too expensive. They buy art because they want a little piece of the artist. They're connecting with you on a very primal, emotional, spiritual level.
Right.
And it's not that they want to, you know, it's not that they want a sea turtle painting. They want a joyful painting because they have a connection with you through that painting. Yeah. And that's what they want. And so, you know, when people see the price, that's never the issue. A lot of artists worry about that. They freak out about that. You know, I've had people on the show that they were talking about the pricing of art and different things. And they always said, add a zero. And a matter of fact, my friend Patrick, he told another artist, add a zero to that painting, but take the price tag and put it behind the painting so no one can see how price is. He says, it'll sell by 12 noon today or I'll buy it. And the other artist was like, you're crazy. And he's like, it'll sell by 12 noon or I will buy it. Guy sold the painting. He put an extra zero on the end of the painting and it sold by 10 a.m. that morning.
Wow.
And it's so the price, the customer that bought it didn't see the price tag until the very end.
Right.
And after talking with the artist and making a connection with the art, because people see like this painting behind you, they see that artwork. Like me, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking of all my fishy friends in the backyard, you know, and Big Bertha, who's my big, she's that long, but she's the biggest, fattest of my goldfish. And I don't even know if it's a boy or a girl, but I call her Big Bertha because when she comes up to eat, she reminds me of a cow.
Yeah.
You know? And so it just reminds me of a cow. So I call her Bertha, Big Bertha. And he or she or whatever it is, they come up and she gobbles the fishy food. And I just lose my mind. I literally embarrass myself. And I'm the only one in the backyard. And my wife just laughs at me and mocks me. And I know she's watching and she will laugh too because I get very excited when my fishy friends come to feed. And that's just how it is. But that painting reminds me of that. And so it's like there's a connection. And then I go, so if I'm an art collector and I'm going to a gallery and I see that and I meet you and we start to talk, that connection that we've made over my fishing friends, this painting, and then you, and all of a sudden I got to have a joyful Enriquez painting. Have to, you know? And so price is whatever it takes at that point, you know? Yeah. And that's the thing, you know, and art is it's an investment financially, but it's also a connection. And that's really what does it, that people don't seem to, and a lot of artists undersell themselves because they don't understand the connection aspect.
Right. Well, you really hit on something that I think is so important. And what makes people stand out from other people, right, is because as an artist, when you're building that connection is the most important thing. And when you're building a painting, like thinking about that, thinking about, you got to ask yourself these type of questions like, what is it about that I'm drawn to? Why am I painting this? Like, what's the motivation? What's the story? Because all of these things are so important. Um, just like you're saying, like basically with painting, you're telling a story, and that's what's going to connect with people. And so sometimes you're selling the art, but you're also selling yourself in a way. And I think too many when I talk to a lot of younger artists or artists who are getting out, a lot of times they'll say they're concerned about what these other people are doing or what this person's work looks like, or, how are they able to like afford that and do this and do that? Yeah, you got to think about the business side of things, but at the end of the day, that's not the motivating factor. That's not the driving force. That's not what actually like will make you successful or bring you joy or meaning to what you're doing. Not that you're getting this big paycheck and that you're like selling all these paintings and like doing all this stuff. It's that connection that you build with people. That's what's memorable. And that's what's different about being an artist than I think a lot of other professions
Mhm.
is that it is everything about what you're doing is about relationship and building relationships with people. And when you genuinely are authentic and real about who you are and what you're doing and why you're doing it, um, and that you genuinely show an interest in the people that are attracted to your work, finding about them, finding out what is it about this work that you were drawn to, why do you like it, why will this bring you some meaning and joy to your environment and to your home, and you find out about their story. um, when people pick up that about you, like they'll be drawn to that, they'll connect with that. um, but if you're all about like, I don't know, like trying to be the next hot shot, whatever, and
Mhm.
you're comparing yourself to what everyone else is doing, you'll miss it. You'll totally miss that because it's their experience and your experience and who you are and who they are that builds that connection. And that's something special that no one else has with them because everyone connects to something different,
Right.
So it's almost like you attract who you are. Sometimes in the art community, it's like
Mhm.
I'm so passionate and I love this so much, and it's so connected to what I feel God's called me to do. How I feel He even speaks to me when I'm in the water. Um, those things excite me and motivate me. That feel me inspired, make me feel part of something bigger than myself. Like that comes across in my work, and when I talk about that, lo and behold, the people I talk to who are interested, they're divers, they're conservationists, they're fishermen, they're people who love to be in the water. And so there's this right away, there's already this little bit of a bond that's formed because we're passionate and excited about the same things, and the same things
Right.
move us.
Right.
Um,
Like follows like. Yeah.
right. So it's like, yeah. So I, I wouldn't be, I wouldn't be where I'm at now without, I guess, being true to who I am as an artist instead of comparing myself to everyone else or trying to incorporate the next fad into my work to try to make it
Right.
more relevant,
Mhm.
or like freaking out because I don't have 10,000 followers on my Instagram like this other person or whatever. And it's like there's an expression that comparison is the thief of joy. It
Right.
really is, especially in the art community. And I think it's so prevalent because we're such a visually driven profession. It's really easy, right? It's
Yeah.
like there's a fine line between looking at an artist and saying, hey, what they're doing really excites me and inspires me. I love how they do this brush strokes and I love all that and wanting to learn. and then going over into, well, man, like they're able to do this and do that, and it looks like they're having all the success. I want that for me. And then you start trying to like copy what they're doing, because you think there's something specific about that or the way their art looks that's made them successful, when it's no, they've found an identity. They found something that works for them,
Right.
that's uniquely their own, that's uniquely connected to their own personal story.
Right.
They're owning it, and they're expressing that in their work. And
Right. That's they found their creative voice.
Yeah.
And that's probably the hardest thing for an artist to find, especially when you're an emerging artist, you're growing and you're learning, is finding, who am I as an artist? And you were talking about how you refer to your painting style and your painting, what you like to paint, the sea life and life around the water and things like that. And you keep referring it to as your calling. And you said earlier about how you felt that God called you to paint these types of things and this type of a path in your life. And it reminds me, and I'm going to age myself here, but you may have never seen this movie. You may have heard, I'm sure you've heard of it, but you're a lot younger than me. So I know you probably haven't seen it, but there's a movie called Chariots of Fire.
Oh, and yeah.
Okay. Have you seen it?
I have seen it.
Okay. So you remember the scene where the main character's family were missionaries in China,
right, and
they were not happy. They were they were kind of legalistic about it. And mind you, this was like World War I era.
Right.
And, but the main character left China, left missionary work. And he went to England to be in the Olympics and to run in the Olympics. And his family was really they were like, no, we are missionaries. And that is a worldly pursuit. So you're sinning and you're doing all these things. And at one point in the movie, his sister comes from China to talk him out of it and bring him home. And she's saying, why are you chasing after this worldly glory for yourself? And it's selfish and it's this and that. And he said something to her that is always, it's like one of my life quotes. And he said, yes, I have a calling. Yes, I have all these things. He said, but there's one thing I know. God made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. Mm-hmm. And it's like God created you as an artist. And he's drawn you to the sea. Mm-hmm. And you've listened to that call. And your name's joyful. You found great joy in following your calling. And I can tell from your work, I can tell when I look at your paintings, you can see you in the studio and his joy is all over you because he's just having the time of his life watching his baby girl paint and create and do what he put you on this earth to do. And that's paint these beautiful images of the sea and the water and all of that. It's beautiful. And to me, that gets me all fired up. Like you have no idea. That's why, but yeah, it's like when you paint, I know you feel God's pleasure just by him watching you and you painting and you're doing what you were put on this earth to do. And there's not many people that can say that about their lives. Maybe there are some accountants out there that when they're crunching numbers, they just feel like, yes, this is the greatest day of my life. Probably not, but there may be a few. But, as an artist with a calling and you're doing what you were put on this earth to do, it's a beautiful thing and it's a beautiful experience and it shows in your work. And so I get excited about it. That's just the way I am. But Joyful, thank you for coming on the show. Guys, if you're watching this show and I know you're tuning in, you've got to go check out her website, see the rest of her work. It will blow your mind. What are some of the galleries that you're in and what cities are they in if people can go see those live and in person?
Yeah, so right now I mainly work with two. Before the hurricane, I had a few others, but yeah, I kind of like condensed my work into two main galleries I work with right now. One is in Annapolis, Maryland. So it's a little coastal city on the East Coast. It's called the Annapolis Marine Art Gallery. They're right down there on the city dock. So they're right on the water down in historic Annapolis, like beautiful location. It's one of the best galleries in Annapolis. Like, if you're there, you got to go check it out. Just awesome work. And then the other gallery I'm in is closer to here, so more local. It's in Rosemary Beach, and it's called Curate Gallery. They have a sister gallery in Atlanta called Vinings. It's owned by the same guy. So a lot of the same artists in both galleries. So if you're in that area, you can find some work up there as well. But Curate down in Rosemary Beach, right across from the Pearl. Right next to the water. So great walkable locations, lots of cool things to see and do down there. And I encourage you to check them out if you're in the area.
Excellent. Well, you stay on the line. I'm going to say goodbye to the audience, but thank you for coming on. It was a pleasure.
Oh, thank you for
I'm going to have to get your husband on this show one of these days.
Yeah,
his
love that.
His paintings and his tattoos, because her husband is like the coolest tattoo artist you've ever met. And so we would love to have him on. We need to do that. I need to get him on the schedule. So I'll be contacting him pretty soon too. That'll be really fun. Perfect. But again, thank you for coming on, guys. Check out her website. And with that said, we're going to say goodbye to you. And but stay on. I'm going to come back on and talk to you real quick, Joyful.
All right. Sounds good. Well,
guys, man, that was a good show. Wasn't her art just stunning? Oh my gosh, it's glorious. And she's just, you can tell she spends a lot of time underwater with these creatures because you can see it in her artwork and it's beautiful. I loved it when she was talking about the way light bounces around down there and how she studied the science behind it and things like that. Her palette or brushes or her mindset behind the painting. This was just a great show, wasn't it? I am just glad that we can bring artists like herself on the Modern Masters podcast. Like I said, guys, we bring you the best of the best, and Joyful is right up there with them. I promise you that. So with that said, guys, just remember, as always, let's talk about what's coming up. Starting next week on September 25th, 2020, we are going to be going with this show live from Gulf Coast State College in the Encore program. And we have got some great guests coming on. We're going to have a live audience behind me on the show. And that'll be going for the next 6 weeks. So I'm pretty excited about that. But we have Eric Rhodes, who will be coming on. He is a publisher of art magazines. You've read them all. He is a fabulous artist himself. And so he's going to be coming on talking to us about publishing, the art world. I mean, this guy has got his thumb on the pulse of the art community and the art world, both with artists, but as well as collectors, galleries. This guy is going to be you're going to love him. And he is going to be a fountain of knowledge. He is a true mentor and father to the art community. And then we have Steve Bennett and Dr. Schmidt. They're going to be coming on. These guys are collectors. They are art patrons, and they are the Bennett Collection. You can check that out online. They're going to be coming on October 2nd. And then on October 9th, we have Tracy Lee Strum, who is a street painter. She does the like, it's pastels, but they call it like street chalk festivals or Modenaro festivals. She's going to be coming on and talking to us about her artwork, doing street paintings. So that's going to be really cool. I think you're going to like her. And then we got a bunch of new artists coming on as well. And in the month of December, oh my gosh, guys, spread the word. Spread the word. The month of December, we're going to be having some massive, exciting, we got something special coming up for you on the month of December that's going to blow your minds. I promise you that. So make sure you tune in the month of December as well. All right, guys, with that said, as always, just remember, I'm your old pal, Tim. God loves you, and so do I. We'll talk to you next time.